What's up, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this episode of Tales from the Crypt. I have the immense pleasure of sitting down with a man by the name of Marshall Long, somebody who's been in Bitcoin for far longer than most people on this planet. He started mining Bitcoin in 2011 and has been on an insane journey since then. We sit down to talk about that journey, some of the insane stories he's created or developed along the way, particularly trips to China to inspect miners and make sure that they were up to snuff for his operations and the characters he met along the way. This was a fascinating episode for me particularly. Marshall has a perspective that I have not been exposed to very, very often and has a unique view on China, what's going on there, the culture there, the economy there, and a very nuanced view of the people on the ground, the Chinese citizens and the CCP. So I think you guys are really going to like this episode. This episode is brought to you by our good friends at the Cash App. You freaks already know all about them. They're helping us do many things. They're helping us stack sats. They're helping us stack slivers of stonks if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can. All right? I know a bunch of you freaks yell at me for talking about the stonks. You know what? I'm going to keep talking about the stonks because you can do it via Cash App investing now. If your favorite stonk's a little too expensive, Cash App investing is letting you invest as little as $1. All right? Get over it. It's possible. Optionality exists. On top of that, they have their Boost program, which allows you to get a very personalized debit card. They partner with merchants. You use that debit card at those merchants, and you save some money. And you can stack some sats with that money you save, if you so please. Because Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, there's no 4 to 5 day waiting periods. You can start investing today and stacking sats today and using the Boost program today. Cash App Investing particularly is a subsidiary of Square and member SIPC. And on top of that, they're becoming their own bank. If you've already downloaded the app, you may have noticed that they're providing you with bank account number and routing numbers, and they're trying to help people who don't have traditional bank accounts get access to the Trump bucks. So doing great things all over the place. Stacking sats. Sats is the standard. I had somebody DM me the other day with an iPhone with iOS. Certain versions are already have sats to standard on iOS, so it's coming across the board. Hopefully that auto DCA feature comes soon. Soon TM. That's all I can say. But when you do download the Cash App, make sure you use the code Stacking Sats. That's one word, STACKINGSATS. You're going to get $10, and $10 is going to go to our good friends at Owls Lacrosse in Chicago. I was talking to Sam, who runs Owls Lacrosse in Chicago last night. He's not a big fan of that dirtbag Al. Al creeps him out too. So Al, stop creeping people out, please. We're just trying to help here. Owls Lacrosse. Enjoy this episode, freaks. I know I certainly did.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
Well, hey there, freaks. It's your boy Marty Bent here to introduce. What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here, rounding out a heavy mining focus week on this podcast. We talk about mining every once in a while in the first 2 years of this podcast, but this last week particularly, this is, I believe, our fourth mining focus podcast in the last 2 weeks. Very excited for this one particularly because we're talking to somebody who's been in the game for quite a while. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Marshall Long. Marshall, how are things going?
Going well, Marty. Can't complain out here, locked down, playing video games like a freak does.
What games you playing?
You know, a little Overwatch, a little Rocket League, a little bit of Modern Warfare here and there.
You play on Twitch? I remember do some research before hopping on the mic with you. I listened to the Hash Rate podcast. Great podcast if you freaks haven't listened to it yet, and you're interested in mining. Great mining focused podcast. You were talking about Twitch and esports and how you think that's the future. Do you dabble in the Twitch game yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we've got players that stream and stuff like that. I usually infrequently stream on Twitch. I'm more of just kind of a casual, filthy casual gamer streamer here and there, you know.
Yeah. No, this quarantine has had me questioning whether or not I should get back into gaming. It's been quite a while.
It's
Definitely
a good
need to get a new
reprise,
router.
that's for sure, man. I can tell you that I would be in a much worse place now than if not. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's fucking nuts, man. Yeah, we were talking about it. We could be doing this for a while, which is a scary thought, but probably best to mentally prep for that. It is a possibility.
Well, never has it ever been more socially acceptable to be a degenerate gamer than now. So take the chance while you got it.
Right. It definitely is my opportunity to get back into it. But we're here to talk about Bitcoin and mining overall. Who knows? We may drift into other conversations as well. Again, like I said, I'm excited to talk to you. You've been in the game for quite a while. You started mining in 2011. Is that correct?
I got in late 2010, yeah.
Yeah. So what were you doing before you got into Bitcoin? How did you find mining particularly?
Yeah, so immediately before I was working on some app development with a buddy. And then just before that, I was a engineer doing design work for paint spray booths back in Texas. So from there, I went and started designing apps and stuff just because I got a passion for programming. And then one of my buddies that was working on the apps with me told me over lunch one day about this new weird nerd money that you could find with your computer. And I didn't know anything about the financial implications or, I'm just a country boy. I didn't know anything about finance or any of that stuff. And so I just kind of went down the rabbit hole from the aspect of, this is strictly something cool and nerdy that I was interested in. And that's it.
Building apps. What languages were you working with particularly?
The one we were working on at that current time was just Objective-C at the time. Swift was, I think, just coming out. So it was for a golfing app. You're trying to track the head of a putter with an iPhone. And a little bit ahead of its time. The processors weren't what they are now. So that was a nice time to pivot, I think.
No, I'm trying to think of what the camera quality of the iPhone was even back then. What version was it on back then? Like 3?
Is it an iPhone 3? Yeah, I think it was around the time of the 4 and 4S actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you got into mining, was it still CPU or GPU starting to get on the scene at this point?
Yeah. So around the time I got involved, just kind of like passively. I started with CPU stuff, and then it quickly, right as I was getting into it, switched over to GPU. And then very quickly after that was the FPGA stuff. FPGAs kind of stuck around for, I don't know, maybe about a year or so from companies like Butterfly Labs. And then you had the ASICs coming out. And then from there, it was just all ASIC stuff.
What was your strategy like early on acquiring this hardware? Were you looking for beat up used stuff, or were you buying off the rack so you could last longer? Or was
yeah, from the onset, like I said, I didn't have any kind of forethought into this thing. I was initially like, oh, I can get graphics cards for free. That's so cool. And so I would go on Craigslist during the GPU days, and gaming computers at that time had a really crap secondary market, and so I was able to buy nice gaming computers and use those. And then when Litecoin launched, I was able to reposition those to mining Litecoin. And then, altcoins kind of picked up from there. Litecoin ASICs launched, and then I think we switched those GPUs to Feathercoin probably, just like a spinoff of Litecoin. And of course, we went headfirst into the ASIC stuff. So at some point we were doing GPU and ASIC mining for maybe about a year or two. And then the reality is ASICs are just so much easier to manage at scale. So we just kind of fell off the GPU train after probably right around 2013.
Why do you think they're easier to maintain, or why are they easier to maintain at scale?
I mean, in general, with the full computer, you have so many other things you have to deal with, like Windows updates or Linux updates and driver issues, and being able to, if you want to, the greatest thing about GPUs during our time, when we were super heavy into them, was that you were able to run a lot of profit switching right when all these altcoins first came out. So we can mine Litecoin or Feathercoin or Monero or whatever. Problem is the cost of doing those things goes up. So in order to mine, let's say Ethereum, you had to have more RAM on your computer than you would with just like a Litecoin rig. Same thing for Ethereum. And so, upgrading was a huge pain in the butt, because once you get over, even 50 computers and maybe 200 graphics cards, being able to manage all those is a lot harder, because you'll have driver failures and it's a lot harder to diagnose what's actually going on, because we're running all custom BIOS firmware that either we developed or we found online. And I mean, I'm not, super hardcore. I'm not a graphics card developer, right? Like I don't know how to write graphics card architecture, so I couldn't figure out what's here or there. And it just becomes a pain in the butt if you really want to scale up hardcore. And I have buddies even today that run thousands of graphics cards, and they have specialized tools to help them with that. We just found it easier to run ASICs after about 2013, 2014.
So you're still on that ASIC train? Predominantly ASIC.
So right now we exclusively mine Bitcoin.
Nice. You allowed to disclose? Are you willing to disclose where you're doing that across the world? Or?
Yeah, sure. So we launched a new data center in Canada about a month ago. We launched, and we're launching another one in the States currently. That'll be live this summer. And
you guys, I don't want to prod too much. I know how some miners like to keep it close to the chest, but like, what energy sources are you guys using, if you're willing to disclose that?
Yeah, sure. In Canada, it's mostly renewables, and in the States, it's just straight grid power, so whatever's available. The one in the States is much bigger, so we're not able to exactly pinpoint exactly where the power comes from. So
nice. And so is your decision to mine Bitcoin only just because of the simplicity of using ASICs at scale, or is it more, you said you didn't get into it, you didn't know about finance or money originally. Have you sort of come around to the potential monetary revolution that Bitcoin represents? Or?
Yeah, I started really getting involved after the price fell in 2013. It was super boring. I mean, the price for like maybe even a week or two was like $180 after $1,200, and I was like, oh my God. It was a huge nightmare. And from at that point, a lot of conferences had started. I started going to conferences more and learning, and started to really get involved. And I didn't know people were mostly unbanked outside of the States. I wasn't well traveled at that point. So around that time, I got super interested in the financial aspect of Bitcoin, and started doing more research around how the government's just super crooked, to be honest. Started learning about, market manipulation, especially around like the silver market. It was a huge market manipulation not too long ago, and started getting more involved in researching why gold bugs are super into gold. And from there it just seemed to be, and is now currently, something that I really enjoy doing, is digging into the financial side of it. Because really at this point, banks are Ponzi schemes run by morons, let's be honest.
No, I mean, so that's
especially
how,
because there's no reserve rule now, right? So
that's gone.
It's not even fractional reserve banking. It's just banking, I guess.
Yeah, I would argue like it has been fractionally reserved for a while. It was just semantics that they took out of the took out of the Fed's speeches.
Very likely.
In policy. No, and that's how I found it, was from a finance angle. Like I worked at a fund, and my job was to follow these central banks and write commentaries on why they were making the policy choices they were and why currency markets were moving based off those policy decisions. And in that early age, like 21, 22, I really learned quickly that these assholes have no idea what they're doing. And yeah, it's all a game, a facade, and it's really evil at the end of the day when you think about how money's created.
Oh yeah,
in the current banking system.
100%. And it's interesting. One of the people that works in the building we live in, he was asking me about credit and stuff, and what's the best way to boost his credit. This was just last week, and I told him, credit's okay for now, but when you get to a point where you don't need credit, just don't worry about it. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, dude, think about it. Credit is a tool used to enslave people and let people buy stuff that they really can't afford. And so that allows the price of everything to be so much higher because people can attain stuff without actually owning it. He's like, oh, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not – if you just bring it to people's attention, they immediately understand it. Everybody's being screwed left and right.
Yeah. No, I mean, and if anything, this quarantine is really driving that home. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck, don't have a 2 weeks amount of money saved up, let alone potentially 6 to 8 months if we're forced to stay home and not work. It's we're in a very weak, precarious situation, and we're finding it out in a pretty terrible way.
Yeah, and what's really a joke is the government thinks $1,200 is impactful. That's the number one thing. Number two thing is, I mean, there were already cracks. A lot of people like to tell me, oh, well, you didn't know that the virus is going to come and wreck the financial system. No, but there were already cracks in the financial system before we even got here. That's the reality. And this is just kind of speeding up the process. I feel grateful that I've been preparing for a moment like this for the past 2 years or so with this exact kind of this meltdown. I felt it's coming in the next 5 years. So I feel grateful that I was prepared. However, many people aren't. And now unemployment's like through the roof. So, it's going to get worse, a lot worse before it gets better, especially once there's a vaccine even. I mean, things will still be people just.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird time. And Bitcoiners talk about it a lot too. Like, Bitcoin is like a fourth turning technology, and Bitcoiners and gold bugs alike have been prepping for a moment like this. And like you said, yeah, the virus wasn't the cause for all this. It was the match that lit the fuel that's been building for decades, I would argue. At least 5 decades since we went off the gold standard. Arguably a century since the Federal Reserve was created and forced upon us. Do you think people wake up to Bitcoin because of this? Do you think more people are questioning it?
I can tell you that if they don't now, they never will, to be honest. And Bitcoin was spawned in a similar time in 2008 and a similar economic time. And a lot more people know about Bitcoin now than they did, thanks to the 2017 run-up. The price, what I'm going to use in air quotes, stability right now compared to the equities markets right now is really interesting, and I think it bodes well for the future. But I will say if Bitcoin over the next, 24 months doesn't really take some kind of meaningful hold outside of price, right? I'm not even worried about the price. But once the economy really starts feeling the effects of these inflationary acts, if Bitcoin doesn't shine, I don't think it ever will. But it's starting to show that already.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of people that are taking their Trump bucks and buying Bitcoin was pretty surprising to see. That's the other weird thing about the Trump bucks. Like, people who don't need it are getting it and then buying Bitcoin with it. No.
I think the cutoff was if you make over 100K, if you filed over 100K last year on your taxes or something, you don't get it, and that's a lot of people who didn't, right? So.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting times. No, I agree. I think right now is the very right moment for people to sort of turn to Bitcoin and learn more about it. They may know about it from 2017, but now I feel like people are going to be diving more into it and trying to learn and actually understand it this time around, where 2017, maybe this is a good segue into like what the mining world was like around then, even though you would have been in transition to ASICs, but 2017 people were just like trying to make a shit ton of money. Now hopefully people are trying to fix the money.
Sure. I mean, 2017 was kind of a meme, right? Everybody and their dad. I remember very specifically, I was working, doing some consulting work on the side for a company that's in the crypto space, and the CEO came in one morning on a meeting. He was like, my taxi driver on the way here tried to get me to buy Bitcoin. I think I'm calling the top. And it was sure enough, like a month later, everything kind of started going down. But that's a good thing in the fact that way more people know about it. I mean, I can remember very specifically in the early days, I would just not tell people that I had anything to do with Bitcoin because I didn't know if it was illegal or, I would tell people around like 2013 when the first run up started happening, people would say, oh, that's drugs, right? Like, oh, God, because that's all they've heard about it. But now it's very rare that you go somewhere and somebody doesn't know what it is to some degree, right? Or have heard of it. So.
Yeah, no, let's pull on this thread a little bit. How have the different manias changed and evolved? So like the first altcoins like Purecoin, Namecoin, all that shit, and then the ICO bubble. How did those two compare, and what do you think the next one looks like, if there is a next one, or do you think people wise up about that?
Well, I think the first kind of like new thing outside of Bitcoin, I mean, I think it still is pretty cool. Namecoin having a decentralized DNS service, I think it's cool. There are some interesting products that have been built on top of it, but it never really got the chance to kind of shine, I don't think. Just because I don't think maybe people want that for whatever reason. The very first attempt in the early days to make something new was an interesting and exciting time. But you didn't see the amount of places to trade these assets, right? Like I used to be a trader on, thankfully I was able to skirt Mt. Gox, mostly because of my own laziness. But
why is that?
Well, in order to set up a Mt. Gox account, you had to deposit, in order to set up like the US dollar type stuff, you had to set up an account with a PayPal competitor called Dwolla. And Dwolla, the way it had to work is you set up the account, you linked it to Mt. Gox, and the Mt. Gox would send like very small 1 cent or 2 cent deposits to your Dwolla account. And then your Dwolla account would send 1 cent or 2 cents deposits to your bank account, and you had to verify those deposits, and it usually took a week or two. So I went through all that, and then right before I was going to start sending Bitcoin to Mt. Gox to start trading, Mt. Gox's Dwolla account got seized by FinCEN, I believe, and it was 10 or 20 million. I don't remember the exact number, but their Dwolla account got seized. And I was like, well, all right, this seems super sketchy. Maybe I'll just try to find some other place to trade. And so I ended up switching over to BTCE, and I used BTCE a lot, but I didn't really use the dollar side of things. I would just trading the altcoins, and that's where I first got interested in, things like Purecoin and Namecoin and Litecoin, because a new trade pair would pop up every so often. You're like, oh, what's this? And then you start doing research. Oh, it's mineable. Okay, cool. Check it out. And then, Nova Coin, the first like stakeable coin. So I learned a lot from the trollbacks on BTCE, to be honest.
PTCE, RIP. BTCE was a Russian exchange that got seized, I believe, by FinCEN or the FBI as well.
Yeah.
Because there's theories out there that they were helping launder Gox coins, right?
Oh, I'm sure they were at some point, right? Because, I mean, in the early days, there's like Trade Hill, right? There was Gox, BTCE came up shortly after that, BitInstant, Charlie's thing, and that was really it. So, at that point, I wasn't going to give anybody a whole lot of information if I didn't feel comfortable. And so I just got on an account that didn't require me to validate any kind of information at all. And I just went to town.
Yeah. That's fascinating how Wild West it was. And I'm happy you mentioned Namecoin. Even though it is a cool idea, it really highlighted how competitive hashing is, especially SHA-256. That's why it failed inevitably, right? It shared the same hashing algorithm as Bitcoin, and you have miners competing, or you have hardware competing, or those chains are competing for the hardware running that hash function. And so, did you notice that in real time? Like,
well, the developers for Namecoin quickly pivoted to merge mining from Namecoin and Bitcoin. So then they were able to save that quickly because most of the pools at that time would just integrate that into their pool server. So most of the pools were merge mining Namecoin, and then the real problem came was they weren't passing that on to the miners, and they were just merge mining it on the back, and then just selling all the Namecoin they would get because it was just extra money. And so there was so much sell pressure that it eventually killed it off.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what was it like learning the dynamics of these hashing markets, I guess, as you were going on? And was it a baptism by fire? Did you foresee any of this stuff, or was it a lot of, oh shit, this is how this works, I should adapt accordingly?
Well, it was kind of around the time like Butterfly Labs came out with their thing. A lot of stuff was happening at the same time. I can remember the first time thinking, man, Bitcoin could be something very serious when I was walking around the mall with my now wife, and I was on BTC on my phone, just like, kind of day trading a little bit because I don't want to shop around the mall. And I saw the price bouncing up, $30, $40, $50, $30, $20, $50, just like up, down super quickly. And I'm like, man, this could be super huge. Imagine if this thing could get to like $200. How crazy would that be? And me thinking, I wish I knew more rich people to get them involved in Bitcoin. Because at this time, I didn't have any money. My parents didn't have any money. Like, I didn't know anybody. So fairly early on, I could see the potential from a price standpoint, and nothing beyond that, Bitcoin. But when all the other coins started coming out, being able to transfer hardware to those other coins was interesting. But then I started to dig into the higher tech stuff, like the FPGAs that Butterfly Labs put out. Those were decent. And then all the issues around when their ASICs launched, having huge shipping delays. And I actually forgot that I pre-ordered one until like it came like 8 months later, came in a box, and there was like it looked like somebody put a Coke can on it. It had like a Coke can ring on the top of it. I plugged it up, and I was immediately like, whoa, this thing's really cool. And then like the next week I sold it because they were going for double on eBay. And then the grid seed miners came out, and that was super cool because you could mine Bitcoin and Litecoin at the same time with one ASIC, and that was super interesting. And then I got into hardware hacking because of those, because if you cracked them open, you could do some voltage mods and get more hash rate out of them. And then all the rails kind of came off, and we went real deep into the ASIC mining world.
Yeah, it is interesting still to this day, people tinkering at the firmware level just to try to eke out crazy efficiencies, because it is the podcast I dropped yesterday. Austin Storms has been in the game not as long as you, but he's been mining since like 2013. Described it perfectly well. Like, it's ruthless capitalism. You have to get to the lowest cost possible for your operations if you're going to win this. And you mentioned that on the Hash Rate podcast, Adam Back telling you the chicken shack
data center, man. That's right. And it's an arms race too, right? Like, if you don't have, and that's why a lot of people from 2017 got absolutely smoked, because they overbuilt and they bought the wrong stuff to try to save capex, and I ended up biting them in the butt. So it's also an arms race in the fact that you got to have some insider knowledge on what's going on the chips across all the manufacturers and any new manufacturers that crop up. Logistics chains is important to consider. Like, if you want to buy from Bitmain right now in volume, you got to get it from Malaysia. If you want to buy from WhatsMiner right now, that's a different process, and you got to know their lead times so that you can time your upgrade cycles along with the current network issues right now. So it's more of a arms race in the fact that you need the newest gear, but when do you pull the trigger on that new gear? And that's kind of become an art form at this point.
Yeah. that's something we've learned as well as it's in the hard way. Like a company that I work for, we started our mining journey at like the height in 2017. It's like, oh, how do you? I wasn't part of it then. I have come on later, but it was like, we've got all this Bitcoin that we've made from ad revenue. Like, what do we do with it? Let's buy miners and figure out what to do with them. Thinking you could just like plug them in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
you find out they're a jet engine, basically.
Right.
Super
so that's
loud.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating because you mentioned it earlier. You weren't well traveled before Bitcoin, but it seems like it sent you on this crazy journey to far off lands. So,
Yeah, it's
what's
really
that
crazy,
been
man.
like?
I'm really grateful to Bitcoin because it's really changed my entire life. I mean, I'm from a super small town in Texas. My graduating class in high school was like 50 people. Now I've got friends all over the world. I've been to, I don't know, probably 30, 35 countries, maybe 40 at this point. I'm almost trilingual now, and it's really been interesting to be able to see how different people operate. Because I had a very narrow view of the world at that time, and I mean, to some extent, I still do, right? Like I've been to a lot of Western places. I've been to China a whole lot, Asia a good bit, but haven't been to South America a whole lot. Haven't been to Africa at all, and it's Bitcoin has really kind of helped me develop interpersonally for sure, and I'm super grateful for that. And it's given me a lot of cool stories to tell too. That's for sure.
You got any cool stories you want to share right now? Like, what's the weirdest situation you found yourself on these travels for the mining?
And I've been in a whole lot. I mean, that could be a whole 5-part series, to be honest. But I don't know, man. Probably the weirdest one was one of the times I went to China. Buddy of mine wanted me to go check out some warehouse of ASICs that he was trying to ship to me, and I wanted to see him in person before he shipped them. And he said, "All right, fly to Shenzhen. There'll be a lady there to pick you up." I was like, "All right." And at this point, I didn't speak hardly any Chinese, and I speak okay Chinese now. I'm not fluent by any means, but I get to the airport and there's 2 guys just randomly standing somewhere, and they just say, "Come with me." And generally, when people do that, they want to take you in like some fake taxi or something, try to charge you, whatever. And so I resisted for a while, but they kind of manhandled me and just kind of put me in a car. And I was like, all right, this is weird. So I'm texting my buddy and I'm like, hey man, you said a lady was going to pick me up. This is 2 really young dudes. Am I in the right place? He didn't text me back, and they're just driving. And so like, it was like 30 minutes go by and I'm like, what is going on? 45 minutes go by, still no text from my buddy. And so I'm sweating. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Finally, he texts me back. Like an hour we've been driving. He's like, yeah, it's 2 guys. Sorry. I'm like, okay, cool. At least I know I'm in the right car. But they're like taking me way off the beaten path, like back some weird alleys and stuff. But he said it's 2 older guys, and these are 2 younger guys. So I'm like, okay, I still like. There's no way that this warehouse is literally in the middle of nowhere, with like a whole bunch of miners that I need to inspect. And so I'm still freaking out, walking up these stairs into this warehouse, and we go through the first set of doors, and all kinds of weird stuff in this warehouse, man. Like in the right hand, I can remember there being like a stack of like mammoth tusks that people were breaking down for like Chinese medicine or something, like elephant tusks. And then there's like a dude in the back left corner, like just randomly grinding metal, laughing his head off. And I was like, I'm going to die here. This is so sketchy. And then there's randomly like giggling at me and then running away. And I'm like, dude, this is like a horror movie set. Like, what's going on? And so I freak out and I'm running down this hallway, just like opening doors to see if I can find miners. Because if I can't, I'm out. And finally, I open a giant room of miners. I was like, oh, thank God, this is the right place. They're not trying to kill me. Because nobody spoke English. I didn't speak any Chinese. My translator wasn't working, like my translator app on my phone. So, yeah, found the miners. It didn't die. It was a good day.
Holy shit! I don't know if I would have. I would have probably pissed myself and ran out of there.
Yeah,
I
it
would have gone
was.
searching for them.
my blood pressure was up, man. It was scary.
So what happened when you finally got the miners? Somebody like, oh, it's you.
I found the miners. I was like, okay, these are the right guys, and they're just looking at me like, what is wrong with you? Why are you sweating so much? Number one, and why are you freaking out? And so I opened the boxes and kind of reviewed them, and kind of tested to make sure everything was good. And I said, okay, let's go. And then I got back in the car and went to the airport. That was it.
So it was like a 3-hour round trip.
Yeah.
Back to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. Fuck, man. And the miners were worth it, obviously.
Yeah, it was fine. It all panned out.
Yeah. Shit, man. Fuck. It's crazy over there. I mean, I've never been over there. What's it like?
I can tell you, man, China has changed a lot. So the first time I went to China, I think was 2013, 2014 maybe, was to develop. I started developing firmware for miners around then, and I was helping with one of the first sets of Litecoin ASICs at that time. And believe it or not, it was in Wuhan. And the first place I went in China was Wuhan, where apparently coronavirus came from. But being able to see China from that point till now, it has changed so much. The culture, the people. Back then, it felt people were a lot more kind of about themselves, because the thing that most people don't realize just how many people are in China. If you think about it, it's like 1 out of 6 people in the world is in China, not Chinese, in China. And there is just so many people that if you don't kind of look out for yourself and be selfish to some extent, like, you'll die. There's just that many people. However, that mentality is rapidly changing. I've seen a lot of cultural shifts in the big cities for sure. Even when I went back recently in December, it really felt like a whole different place, man. It's really cool to see how the culture has changed from being a mostly kind of inward looking culture to now, I mean, I actually had people like open doors for me in China. I mean, that doesn't even happen in Boston, right? So it's and that's not like me feeling that it's different because I'm white and privileged. It's me just like literally sitting outside a restaurant and just like seeing what's going on around me. People are the mentality of the people is changing. It's really cool to see, man. I can see people being more caring towards each other, and especially now the work that they've done during lockdown has been very impressive. The amount of respect that they're giving each other, it's really cool to see, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and to be completely honest, I'm somebody who's been railing against the CCP the last few months due to their, from what I deem, handling of the virus to be like sketchy and probably made it worse, just from not sharing information hourly. But that's the CCP.
Totally. Well,
CCP
you can do
isn't the
things
Chinese
in China
people,
that
though.
you can't do, right? You can do things in China you can't do here, right? So my wife is Chinese, and so we have firsthand account of what it took when they were actually on lockdown, and they were like, if we even go outside, like, we go to prison. Like, as soon as we step out the front door, like, we're done. And now if you don't wear a mask outside, you get in trouble. So it's like there are things that you can do in China that you can't do here that really helped them kind of stamp out coronavirus to some extent. I don't believe that there's no more outbreaks there, but the extent that they went to locking down the country is definitely not something that you could do here. So I will say that, and like this, it's interesting. What do you prefer? You want an authoritarian government that can really get stuff done, or do you want to have personal liberty? And this is an interesting kind of thought experiment I've been having with several of my friends, especially Chinese friends, that are like messaging me daily, like, are you dead yet? Is everything okay? And they feel a lot of national pride now that their country has been able to a large extent control the pandemic inside of China. So it's really interesting now. And I think this might be signaling the end of, the American capitalistic monolith now, compared to, I think at the end of this, you'll start to see China really taking over from like a economic powerhouse standpoint, because now there's a huge sense of pride inside of China, that they've been able to kind of do such a good job, and even a strong sense of community internally. People are really trying to look out for each other and stuff, mostly from what I've been seeing. And again, I don't know everything about China. This is just my opinion, what I'm seeing. A lot of people will be like, "Oh, he's white. He doesn't know nothing about China." And, I mean, to some extent that's true, but this is just my observation. I think it's going to be interesting for sure. I think this might be the beginning of the end of the U.S. powerhouse. We'll see how the inflation goes, but
Yeah, we'll see, right? And this is fascinating because I've been on the complete opposite of that, where I think
interesting.
at least the West, and that's why I'm happy to speak with you as sort of an insider view of what's going on in China. As obviously have a Western view of the world and a Western frame and data source, right, or a data stream. And I've been saying and have talked to people who believe like this virus particularly is going to have people turn away from China and like shift supply chains home, which may not be best for them in the long run. And
it could be.
Yeah.
However, China is really good at a lot of different things. The education system in China is, just like regular schooling is way better than in the States, that's for sure. But beyond that, the way they approach post high school education is interesting. It's, a lot of people will go to a traditional, like a Harvard type deal. There's a big prestigious university in Beijing called Tsinghua. And, a lot of people will go there. However, the people who can't get into those schools in the States, you just don't go to school, right? You're a mechanic or something. Focused school. And so there are people in China who can do things that we can't do in the States. And I'll give you a good example of that. When the Apple Watch first came out, the crystal on that watch, the what looks like a glass piece on that watch, the screen, it's actually made out of sapphire. And the edges are rounded in a way that a lot of people tried to criticize Apple in the West, saying like, oh, there's no way our simulations can grow sapphire in this kind of shape and this curve, and here's our proof, and blah, blah, blah. But when it actually came out, that whole thing is made out of sapphire, because there were people who were trained specifically on growing crystalline structures in China at Foxconn that were able to develop that in such a way that it worked. And so that's something that you can't take out of China. It's really hard to export that kind of talent because it's just been in their culture for so long, that there are a lot of people in China who can do stuff that nobody else in the world can do. So right now China's on lockdown, right? You can't go into China right now as a foreigner. But I don't think that there's going to be a way that you can export that kind of talent in such a large volume that it would shift the paradigm.
Interesting. Fascinating. So like more like trade focused specialization that you don't see anywhere else.
That's right.
Fascinating. And getting back to that's something I've actually thought about a lot. Like my sister is a ceramicist. And I wish she was just able to focus on that alone and nothing else and just master that craft. But like you said, the American schooling system doesn't allow for that. Well,
it's also the economy, right? Like in China, there are very few things that are super expensive. Cars are pretty expensive, housing, and most people, like you can't buy land, you can't own land unless you live out very, very in the outskirts, like very far away in the countryside. So the only things those are mostly the only things that are expensive. Everything else, food, the essentials are super cheap. And if you don't have a job, the government, if they don't have any available for you, they will create one for you. So the focus of people is much different than here, right? What you worry about every day, what I worry about every day is something different than what people in China might worry about every day because of the government structure. So, people might have more time. They have definitely less freedom. They definitely have, a lot less than here, but they also don't have the fear of, if your company blew up today and my company blew up today and we had to somehow burn through all of our savings and all our investments went to zero, what would you do? You would have to start all over. But that's not the case in a communist-focused government. You can argue that China is mostly capitalistic, and that's true on the economic side, but the government side it's not. So, it's a give and take. And by no means should that be construed that, Marshall Long thinks Chinese communism is awesome. It's not true. I'm a libertarian, and mostly I just want people to leave me alone and just let me do my own thing. But I mean, that's why the system allows people to be able to focus on certain things and getting super detailed on a few aspects.
Yeah. No, again, it's infinitely fascinating, and that's always been my biggest wonder. Is there's like a huge shadow banking system. You have the like the ghost cities and stuff like that. Is this just Is this just like a temporary boon before an inevitable collapse? Because the system is just inherently fragile because of the top-down nature of the government. And
sure. Well, I've been to ghost towns, man. I've been in 60-foot high-rise buildings that I'm the only person in. I mean, that's real.
What was that like, and why were you there?
It's weird, man. It's super crazy. It was in northern China, and I mean, that's just like a weird place to begin with. But, we were riding bikes inside the building. Like, you could ride a dirt bike in there if you wanted to, because there's nobody there. It's like a dude at the front desk that's sleeping all the time, and it's you, and that's it. And so the reason that happened is because the government's trying to stimulate the economy, and they're getting like 7% GDP growth year over year during that time. And it's because, a lot of internal corruption. This guy's giving his cousin the construction contract, and this guy's marking everything up so they can make more. It's a super, super corrupt system. Not to say that that's not the case in the States, but it's almost transparently corrupt. So it's a really weird feeling to be in a very large building and you be the only person there. So, but at the same time, China's got other things down pat, right?
Like what? Like
like the manufacturing and engineering. A lot of, there's electronics people in China that I've met that they have a lot of my Chinese buddies who worked at Amazon and, PayPal and Tesla and all these really great companies to work for. Some people argue Tesla's not a great company to work for, but they're leaving these companies to go back to China because they're making more, and startups in China the culture is very different, and they want to be a part of it.
Yeah. It's
so
fucking
a lot of my Indian buddies are quitting jobs at Facebook and Google to go run big startups in India, So it's an interesting time for sure.
It's very interesting. No, so do you believe in like the sovereign individual thesis that nation states are going to break down to smaller and smaller municipalities, potentially citadels? And again, so that's what drives me crazy about China, is like you just described, as crazy innovation, especially at the app and engineering level. But are they forced to sort of build for the CCP? And do we want like a social credit system? And is it dangerous even though it is insanely capitalistic in some sense, at the end of the day, you can't route around the CCP. And if we get that exported across the world, is that something everybody should live under and put up with?
Yeah, and that's the question. And I by no means would want to live under that. However, there are perks, if and I can tell you right now, especially now, like I respect people's right to go outside, even when they're urged to stay inside. However, that doesn't make you not an asshole, right? That's the reality. You go and you want to party with people and stuff right now, like it just means you're selfish. It doesn't mean you can't, and I respect your right to do that. That doesn't mean I don't dislike you, because I definitely do, because I think it's selfish and stupid. So in this kind of give and take, you can kind of see that there's a silver lining to being so oppressed constantly. Yes, every Chinese startup has a backdoor built in, full stop, period. End of story. So every message I send on WeChat, I know that it is being read by some machine learning algorithm that is flagging me for XY. That's why I have to watch what I say on WeChat. I mean, even when you go in now, they have a facial recognition thing that you must register your face print with these cameras before you go through customs. So China knows where I am at all times. It's the most heavily pervasive CCTV country on the planet. It is full lockdown all the time. They know where I am all the time. Is that a place I want to live? Hell no. Is that something that's super scary for like a post-utopian society? Definitely. But, you know, I don't know why I feel the culture changing in China, but the social credit system might be part of that. I don't know.
Yeah. Is it the Black Mirror like click?
Yeah. It feels like that sometimes, man. But every time I talk to my family about it in China, they'll say we don't really have to worry about that anyway because we're not assholes, and that's true, I guess. But the thing that I always hate is people say, well, why don't you want to be watched all the time? If you're not hiding anything, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. I hate that because I don't really have a good retort to that. Besides, I don't want people watching me all the time.
Just give me your phone. Let me read through all your texts and your pictures and
exactly
your passwords. Like,
it's interesting in China though, because everybody knows that it's going on. They're very, I'm not going to say transparent about it, but it's very opaquely obvious that that's happening, and people know that. In the States, it's definitely happening too. I mean, in England, GDPR, all this kind of stuff, GCHQ, like that's where the internet cables come into England, is literally GCHQ. So, I mean, everybody knows it's happening. It's just, are you in a position to be able to protect yourself? Do you want to protect yourself? Most people are just so lazy they don't care, and that's the scary part.
Exactly. It's very scary, and it's actually too, like, how has Bitcoin survived so long in China, specifically the mining and all that? Do you see the government clamping down on Bitcoin? Particularly, they just announced their digital cryptocurrency last week or earlier this week. Do you think they'll clamp down on or try to clamp down on Bitcoin usage within the country at any point?
Right now, Bitcoin usage inside the country is a weird place. I think it's a gray market right now. However, all the major Chinese exchanges are kind of not Chinese anymore, if that makes sense. They have either shut down or moved their offices to like Thailand or something like that. The great thing about Bitcoin is we don't need anybody's permission to use it. That doesn't mean that, there's pros and cons to a public blockchain too. If you want to do nefarious stuff, there's a lot of really good companies that are great at tracking this kind of stuff. So problem with the blockchain is it's there forever. And the best part about a blockchain is it's there forever. So it's kind of a double-edged sword at that point. But there's nothing you can really do to kill Bitcoin at this point. So if the government decides to go one by one and axe every single data center in China, they'll just relocate and keep going.
Yeah. You don't think the government could forcibly take over all the data centers in China and try to 51% attack the network? Or
at this point, I feel very confident that less than 50% of the hash rate's in China. So
interesting.
I'm not really
number you hear thrown around a lot is 60 to 70%.
That used to be the case. However, a lot of stuff's getting spun up in Kazakhstan. A lot of stuff still going in Sweden, Iceland, South America, even the States. There's some big operations in the States. Canada's got some big operations. So I mean, it's getting a lot more geodiverse now as large players start to hone in on cheap power pricing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, again, we discussed it before we hit record. The company I work for, that's our main goal, is to try to bring hash power to U.S. soil, particularly on oil fields. And you have some thoughts on particularly on mining on oil fields. What you haven't shared them with me yet, so I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, the biggest problem with doing flare-off stuff is two things. Number one, in order for me to go to a site, right, I think you have to take a 24-hour OSHA class. So you can't do a lot of hey, come to this thing and check it out. Can't do a lot of dog and pony shows if you're trying to raise capital to investors. It kind of becomes a problem. Number two, it depends on it depends on the business model, right? Your business model is not necessarily mining so much as it is trying to facilitate a need to kind of take control of the excess gas to allow them to continue to drill. But that's not my business model, right? So my scale that I can hit as far as mining in one location is much greater than any kind of flare off place that you could run in a safe, very large scale. Because at some point that well will be capped, or you're not going to be able to generate 200 megawatts from one well flare off. It's just not a reality. And so your issue, if you really wanted to go super big, would be finding more locations. More locations means more unique ways to manage those locations, having different people in different locations. So your OPEX is a lot higher than what mine usually is. However, my CapEx is all upfront, right? So it just depends on your business model, right? So that's the only thing I'll say about flare stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've definitely noticed that those are some hurdles to overcome. But yeah, it depends on who you partner with, right? And and that's the interesting thing about drilling. So you drill a hole in the ground, and maybe for 6 to 8 months you can have enough flare to do maybe 100 megawatts or something like that. But then after that, it's considerably reduced for the remaining life cycle of the well pad. Well, we think we found in interesting scenarios. We're working with one oil company that's got a lot of well pads pretty close together, and so that is something we're working to figure out, and think we're solving is how to manage many disparate containers across an oil field, where you don't have a data center where you can just send 5 people into
right.
one
the
location.
Other thing too is for oil specifically, right? Biggest problem for mining in general at large scale is the fact that there are so many variables that you must try to control. And when you're a slave to another variable being oil price, God, I cannot imagine that financial headache for a very long-term mining situation, right? Because the oil price goes down like it is right now. Like, tell me, are people like shutting off? Like, what's the deal in the field?
Where we are, the pad we're on is not shutting off. They are consolidating. They've decided not to drill any new holes, I believe. I can't speak too much because of NDA stuff. But yeah, we are safe. Our operation, it's relatively small. Just to be clear, we haven't scaled up immensely yet. Is safe right now and for the foreseeable future from we can tell. But yeah, that is definitely a variable to take into consideration. But that's where we think that we can come in and sort of help some of those uncertainties for the oil companies is, hey, yes, you guys have price volatility, and you're wasting all of this gas. So that's where we're basically, again, flare mitigation, trying to help them get under emissions levels. And so they're just giving us the gas. We're like, hey, if you can throw this through, catalyze this, throw it through an EPA approved generator and reduce emissions and actually get value out of that helps us immensely. And so that's the first step. And then eventually we'd like the oil companies to start investing in these mining ops. And that's our thesis, is that they will start, and they'll start to see Bitcoin as a sort of supplementary revenue stream to the oil stuff. So it can help when the oil price is a bit suppressed.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you can overcome the challenges of, managing dozens of containers at the same time with limited overhead, I think that's something that's potentially interesting for sure. Biggest problem is, like, if you spin up a 100 megawatt spot and then they cap that thing or reduce the rate at which they're giving the gas out, then the question is, how do you transport 100 megawatts worth of gear, right? Like, it's a huge logistic nightmare.
Yeah, no, that's part. I mean, again, don't want to disclose too much, but container design and specifically making the containers portable is very, very high on the mind.
Super crucial. Yeah.
And then who you partner with is also very crucial as well. How well their business is run and whether or not they can weather these storms. So again, a lot of factors, but it is fascinating, and it would be a cool problem to solve, and to actually, that's why I decided to jump on this team and work for Great American Mining, because it's a big problem. And it would just be cool to be part of the team that helps solve it, right?
Sure. I mean, we've kind of talked about all kinds of stuff over the years where, you could back up a container to like a warehouse and provide heat in the winter so that they could save on their power bills, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what's great about mining is that everybody is working towards the common goal of getting their cost of production down. And there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. And that's really interesting for sure.
Yeah, totally. And that's what was I just gonna say? I wanted to ask you, like, what are your thoughts on the foundries being in the chip fabs being so few and located in one part of the world? Like, do you envision America or North America or maybe even South America investing in a foundry or fab factory that can produce ASICs if Bitcoin hits a certain threshold of importance?
It's interesting, right? I can tell you my answer is no overall, but the reality is I think there's not private foundries. I think there's three. You got Global, you got SMEC, you got TSMC. However, Intel runs their own stuff. Samsung runs their own stuff. There's a few analog foundries too. I think Texas Instruments runs their own analog ASIC place. And some of these companies have run Bitcoin ASICs for themselves. It's interesting in the fact that a Bitcoin chip in general is not hard to design compared to a graphics card or a CPU. And the amount of brain power that's out there designing GPUs and CPUs right now is really interesting because they could easily switch over to designing Bitcoin ASICs if the price shot through the roof. Problem is, foundries, the type of stuff that goes on in a foundry is so mind-boggling high tech that it's insane. Like the TSMC, their foundry floor is, I think, 12 or 13 orders of magnitude more clean than a surgery room, than an operating room. I mean, they're talking particle level filtration because the tiniest speck of dust on those wafers destroys it. So the amount of technology that is being developed and utilized in a foundry will blow your freaking mind. And that's not a simple thing to just be like, oh, Bitcoin's $1 million. Let's make a foundry. It's not going to happen. Just because these people have decades of experience. The technology is highly proprietary. Even if you have a foundry, you have to have access to the process nodes. So like if you wanted to make a 5 nanometer chip right now, you got to have Samsung's permission to do that, and they got to provide you the way to do that. So there's a lot of IP issues at play. So I can feel very certain to tell you that over the next 5 to 10 years, if a Bitcoin explosion happened, you wouldn't see anybody making a foundry for that. You would see people paying Apple to delay their iPhone chip tape out. You see people paying to get on the schedule ahead of AMD, ahead of NVIDIA, to be able to produce their chips faster. That's what I would see.
Interesting. No, so that's, you're alluding to sort of the way these foundries work, right? You rent space on their floor to build whatever you want to build, particularly.
Well, you rent space on the schedule, right? And there's a lot of Chinese hedge funds that will like buy the schedule. I know there's a Chinese hedge fund trying to buy the Samsung schedule to kind of thwart Bitmain's new stuff coming out. It's like a hedge fund, and they'll resell parts of that out. So it's really interesting kind of like plays there for scheduling.
Yeah, secondary markets. It's fascinating, man. It's again, and it's going back to like the ruthless capitalism. That just proves it. If people are gonna be able to pay Apple and other chip makers to move back in line, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, if it makes sense for Apple, then maybe they would do it. But the amount of money that Apple makes on their new iPhone launch is so astronomical that the price would have to be insane, right, for them to agree to do that. So And they have preferential treatment at TSMC, as does AMD. So I mean, if they don't want to do it, they wouldn't do it. So I mean, but that kind of stuff does happen. I'm not saying explicitly with Apple or AMD, but before somebody would go spin up a foundry and spend several dozens of billions of dollars doing that, it's more likely that they would pay one of these big companies to jump the line.
Yeah. That's one thing because again, the sunk cost of getting one of these spun up and doing it correctly is so large that it is a huge risk. And so when I hear Trump and the politicians throw around infrastructure spending, that's always something that's popping into my mind. Like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, infrastructure here is like going to shit, right? So,
yeah, maybe. Yeah, we live in weird times. You're talking about leaving where you're at. Why do you want to leave there?
It's just a culture thing, I guess. The first time I moved to Boston, I got smacked in the face by the culture here. That's for sure. When people come to Boston, it's mostly to work or be a part of something cool and new. So people are mostly inward focused. And so, in Texas, if somebody doesn't hold the door open for you when you're walking through, it's a big deal kind of thing. I can still remember the first time my dad came. My dad is the most Texas Texan you've ever seen. I took him to this really nice park and we were sitting there chatting, and a guy walked by in a shirt that he liked, and my dad said, "Hey man, that's a cool shirt." And the guy just kind of nodded his head real gently, didn't say anything, and just kind of nodded and kept on walking. My dad almost jumped up and confronted the guy, and I was like, whoa, that's just how they are here, man. They're just kind of cold people. He's not trying to be, he's not trying to be mean to you or whatever. He's just how people are. He was like, "That's rude, man. If I give you a compliment, you're supposed to say thank you." And I was like, okay, I know, but that's not how they work here. So it's I can tell you that I've worked harder in Boston than anywhere else, but I also like the people in Texas, and the food too is really great in Texas. So I'm ready to get back to my nice fat people. I'm
gonna say Texas barbecue is. I'm trying to think of it's better than Dunkin' Donuts, which is Boston staple food.
Right.
Yeah, I'm from Philadelphia, and so I understand. I know.
That's a happy medium there.
Yeah, it was still abrasive Northeast people in Philadelphia, but I actually, when I was like 10, my family moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and that was a culture shock for me.
Oh, yeah.
Having to say yes, ma'am, yes, sir.
That's right.
Going to cotillion, learning how to eat properly and have good manners was. I was sort of apprehensive and rebelled against it at first, but eventually, after living there for 4 years, you succumb to the culture and you end up saying yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. And I'm actually very happy that I spent that time down there. I think it's paid off dividends in the long run. Being polite is hold the door. We say that on this podcast a lot, actually. Just hold the door. Be a good person.
That's right. That's probably what I'm looking forward to most for sure.
Hey, dude, we're like an hour and 5 minutes in. I don't want to take up too much of your time on this quarantine afternoon on this Thursday. Let's end it on what are you most excited about in the mining industry right now?
I'm excited for the halving, man. I'll tell you, I think a lot of people are going to get wrecked, and we are well positioned to take advantage of what I hope is an upcoming difficulty drop. We had a big difficulty drop a couple weeks ago, and I was super excited, and we mined. I mean, that boosted our production by 20%, something like that. And I'm hoping that the price continues to stay low, and then at the halving, ton of people had to turn off and they sell and they have to push the price lower, which means even more people have to turn off. And because my cost of production right now is so low, I feel very confident that we're one of the lowest producers, which makes me well positioned to take advantage of a huge difficulty drop. So that's what I'm most forward looking to for sure.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm fucking happy for you, man, because we're gonna see all these S9s fall off.
Finally, right? God.
Well, maybe if you don't mind answering this question too, what is the how close are we to commodified ASICs? S9's been running for what, almost 6 years now.
I mean, a lot of them fell off, man. I do know that you can buy. There was an offer on the secondary market last week, 11,000 S9s for $40 each. That's crazy.
Right.
Crazy. So I think they're coming off now, man.
But like, how long do the S17s, the M20s, the M30s, like, do you see them having a longer life cycle than the S9s?
Well, yeah, because the problem is you can't go much lower. I mean, Bitmain's having trouble with their 5 nanometer stuff. Cheetah Miner's having trouble with their 5 nanometer stuff. 5 nanometer Samsung process nodes, super painful. It's not like the early days, right? You could take the same design from 65 nanometer to 24, and you have almost tripled your efficiency. That's not the case anymore. So we are smack dab up against Moore's Law at this point. And, what we're doing is we have all custom firmware that we've developed to try to push things a little bit further. We do some special unique things, but I think that the life cycle of gear that's coming out now will be longer than any before, just because there's no more room to go down on process node, and the kind of tricks you can pull on the silicon level are few and far between now. So, I don't think there's a lot of room to develop something that's just so much better that it would warrant me to expend that amount of capex.
So do you think this makes mining more competitive going forward?
Hell yeah. So now power is going to be way more important going forward, because you just can't like change your cost production by upgrading anymore.
Yeah. Oh, all right,
That and customized firmware for sure.
I'm gonna annoy you with like another question. Like, how does this change like energy markets? Right? Like, is it just gonna drive crazy innovations and?
Well, I mean, it depends what country, right? I mean, let's say Sweden, for example. Sweden is its own grid. It doesn't connect to the rest of the EU, and they have issues, right? Because Sweden, nobody lives there. There's a crap load of power there. So, I mean, energy trading isn't super liquid because they're not all connected. All the markets aren't connected. So you just can't like do that super easily. So, I mean, I don't think it changes the dynamic of energy markets as much as it changes where infrastructure gets placed. I mean, there's a big op being built right now in the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan, and that's going to help people be employed. That's going to build infrastructure around that place, streets, roads, hotels, this kind of stuff. I think that's what you'll start to see, these new kind of places that were severely underserved, hopefully getting served by new mining ops and taking advantage of lower pricing. So.
Yeah, that's the mining ups create little local hub economies around the world thesis. It seems like it's coming true.
Yeah, it could be super cool.
Yeah. Well, Marshall, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I know we both got to get back to daddy daycare. I hope you keep your sanity with the gaming and stuff like that. I know it's a struggle these days. I'm trying to do it myself. So I really appreciate you taking some time to do this, and good luck at the halving, man. Pumped for you.
Hey, thanks so much, man. Thanks for having me on, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good, man. Peace and love, freaks. Ding-y!